This video is brought to you by Skillshare. So recently I made a video where I drew some of your characters, and as I was looking through those submissions, I realized that every single one of those reference sheets absolutely put me to shame. Whoa, this is so cool. Wow, so you guys have such like detailed reference sheets of your characters. I could never. Another person with an extremely thorough reference sheet of their character. There's an internal anatomy sketch here. I feel so bad about the documentation of my own characters looking at all of this. And by mine, I mean negative space, the lack thereof, nothing. Looking through those submissions made me realize that I'm neglecting my children. I have two particular characters that are like my comfort OCs that are from the same universe that I draw on a regular basis, and they don't have reference sheets, and they never have. Those characters are Quintessa, a wood elf with flame abilities, and my slightly better known character, Rose Thornblade, who is an elf lady knight with a poison blade. Whenever I draw them, I realize that I keep changing little things about their designs between sketches. They're never quite consistent, especially whenever it comes to what their faces look like. I have never done any true colored illustrations of Quintessa's current design, and I have never decided on a solid color palette for her in general. For some reason, it has continued to be my white whale for some time now. So today we're finally gonna redesign my comfort characters and give them a proper reference sheet so that I finally know what they actually look like. Today we're not going to be necessarily doing a hard overhaul for these designs. I generally like most of what's going on here, but I wanna just revise the existing designs and make them stronger because I know I definitely can. Some of my design goals for these ladies are coming up with limited, pleasing, and intentional color palettes, using more intentional shape language, including their themes, like Quintessa's theme, flames and nature, and Rose's theme, roses and thorns. Coming up with outfit variations that are easy enough to redraw over and over again, and finally nailing down their face structure and design so that I have current reference of them and they're easy enough to redraw over and over again while staying on model. So next, let me show you the evolution of these two characters. So I have created Pinterest boards of both of my characters to kind of illustrate the direction that I want to go in for their redesigns, but first let me show you kind of like old designs, even going back to like the beginning of having these characters, so you can get a grasp on like what they're all about, the general themes that have stuck with them through the years, even through previous redesigns. See, this might be the earliest piece of art that I have of Quintessa, and some things that have kind of stuck with her are like this green cloak kind of outfit thing she's got going on. Also her generally more athletic build. Also having some big old chunky boots. Another consistent thing with her is having like a really thick expressive eyebrows and kind of bigger eyes. This is the first reference sheet that I ever made of her. I forgot that I did one eventually, but I did initially have some kind of full design going on, but I did pretty quickly move away from this because I decided to make her hair longer, and then this was originally her twin. I decided I didn't want them to be twins after all. We've got just some old art here of her still in that like same character design. Younger her with the longer hair, just something that I ended up wanting to carry over into the teen design. This is getting a little bit closer to some of like her hair texture and everything. This is her second redesign years and years ago, probably like, I don't know, 2017 or something at this point. This is getting a little bit closer to her current design. Again, thick eyebrows, chunky boots, the hair color, and this sort of like green cloak hoodie are all consistent things with her that have stayed in place throughout the years. Here's another colored piece still with that same design, so I think I stuck with this one for at least a little while. And here is a mood board I think of whenever I was finally trying to redesign her into the design that's closer to what she is now. So you can see the longer red hair going on here. Also just a lot of layers going on. Finally, this is the most recent piece of art of her that I have in this folder. This is much closer to her current design. Oh, here is a much more recent drawing of Quintessa with like more of the new design, but still, I think that we can do a lot better. Moving on to Rose, this is the first illustration that I ever did of her. I kind of just doodled a random lady knight in my sketchbook, and I liked it enough to turn it into a full character, and she's become probably the character that I draw the most on a regular basis because what can I say? She's just a pretty elf knight, and if that's not my type whenever it comes to illustration, I don't know what is. I used to draw a lot of her and put her on Instagram. So for the most part, her design has stayed somewhat consistent. Here's more rows, still the same design. More sketches that are questionable. Here I think I'm getting a little bit closer to what I want her face to look like. I still quite like the sketch and all of the sketches on this page. I think that they're like a good representation of what Rose should look like. Here's some actual full character art of her. I think probably some of the only art that I've ever done that's like fully colored and rendered, but I'm very unsatisfied with the hair color here because it made everyone think that her hair was a lot darker than it actually is because I drew it a lot darker than it should be. That's on me. Then for even more recent than that, I have this piece that I am pretty sure was some kind of like demo for an art video that I did on the channel. I don't exactly remember, but this is pretty much her current design and one of the only rendered pieces that I have in her current design. And then I think the actual most recent colored piece that I have is this one, which I turned into a charm keychain, which I think is a very nice painting of her. Like the armor looks like armor. The design is intact. I think that it's generally a good illustration. And again, this is not a reference sheet. How are you supposed to figure out colors from a piece like this? So for the Pinterest boards I've assembled, I really wanted them to be as extensive as possible and explore as many areas of the characters and the designs as possible. So both of them have something like 100 pins on them. I have a lot of like general vibes references on here. I have some good like facial matches and models to help me get closer to the kind of design that I want for their faces. Got a lot of sword reference on roses, a reference of like potential hairstyles and hair colors, color palettes. I have a lot of different styles of armor and specifically exploration for different kinds of helmets she could have because that's something really big that I want to design for her. And I also have potential reference of like more simplified outfits that I think would be good for her, more complicated ceremonial armor, and also some like fancier designs that I think that she would wear for like dressier occasions because she is the bodyguard for a prince. So if she's undercover, she's gonna need something that's like a little bit dressed up, but also something that she can still fight in. For Quintessa, I have a lot of the same. I have a lot of facial references and references of like different gear because Quintessa is a character that's sort of on the run for a lot of her story. So everything that she would have with her, she's gonna have to carry on her person. So that's a big goal for her character design. I also want to design an axe or a scythe or some kind of weapon for her that has a flame theme because she has fire abilities. And I also have a lot of different references of like heavy clothing and layering and just cool D&D characters that I think fit the vibes of Quintessa, and also some references of like fiery OCs, red hair. With Quintessa, I want to do a couple of outfit variations for her kind of main storyline outfit for what she wears most of the time. And then also, she does have a bit of a darker redesign towards the middle of the story, so I have some inspiration on here for that as well. But first, before we get designing, to this day, sketching on paper has remained my favorite way to brainstorm and unwind, and as much as I love digital art, traditional sketching just still hits different and never fails to get my creative juices flowing. Which is why I am very excited to announce that I have partnered with this video sponsor Skillshare to create my very own Skillshare class called Sketchbook Regularly Create Character-Driven Colorful Spreads. Since Skillshare has a learn by doing approach to teaching, in my class we create a 2-page sketchbook spread together, discuss my process for taking references and making them your own so you can make the studying and referencing process more fun, and I explain how I design my spreads to have pleasing composition, colors, and layout while remaining fun and intuitive to create. My class focuses a lot on how to establish a reliable sketchbook habit without putting too much pressure on it, so it's great for beginners or people who are looking to complete their first sketchbook. And I also discuss a lot about how valuable working in a sketchbook with tactile layers and experimental mediums has been for my creativity and helping me feel more free as an artist overall. As someone who creates art content on YouTube on an almost weekly basis, staying in a creative mindset and avoiding art block is so important to me, and I'm not exaggerating whenever I say that keeping a sketchbook has been one of the creative habits that has helped me the most. But Skillshare has many more classes to offer than just my own. For those who don't know, Skillshare is the world's largest online learning community for creatives, and they offer thousands of classes taught by industry professionals on a broad range of topics like illustration, painting, video production and editing, music, cooking, productivity and entrepreneurship, and many, many more. I've taken several other great classes on keeping a sketchbook on Skillshare, so I've learned a lot from other teachers on the platform as well. And if you want to dig even deeper into sketching and more structural drawing, they even have a learning path on figure figure drawing that teaches you how to analyze photos or live reference and draw from it at scaling levels of detail. Their learning paths are great as a subject crash course because they're sequential class lists meant to be taken in order where each lesson builds on the last, and they're even taught by multiple teachers so you can get a varied perspective on the same topic. So if any of this sounds enticing to you, you can take my class or any other class on the platform for free, because the first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, which includes access to my new class and all other classes on Skillshare, so get started today. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video and partnering with me on my very first class. Now let's get designing.
So the first task at hand was to do a little bit of shape exploration for both of my characters. Now, this is something that I do in a lot of my other character design videos that I have never quite done for Rose and Quintessa before, but it is something that I've had loosely in the back of my mind as I've drawn them in past years. A lot of traditional shape language has to do with the symbolism of very basic geometric shapes, so circles, squares, triangles, that sort of thing. But for a lot of my characters, I like to make slightly more complicated shapes to use as repeating motifs in their design. I like to begin by breaking down the shapes of symbolic motifs that have already inspired my characters. So for Rose, that is very obviously roses and thorns, no surprises there, and for Quintessa, it's basically flames, volcanoes, plants that grow on volcanic islands. A lot of very active, intense symbolism for her. At this point, I'm not only tracing the photos to see some of the repeating shapes in the inspiration, I am doing that, but I'm also jotting down a lot of notes about characteristics that my character shares with the inspiration in terms of personality and general disposition. I get a lot of the ideas for my characters' personalities and storylines by doing this kind of loose thematic work, kind of trying to intertwine ideas with each other that seem like they might go well together. For example, Rose, much like a rose, is very graceful and beautiful, but she's also tightly wound. She is literally abrasive and thorny on the surface, and it takes time to break through that to get to a softer, more delicate interior. While I'm doing this breakdown, I'm also taking notes of all of the interlocking sharp shapes that are present in the rose patterns themselves, and I'm trying to combine those shapes with the sharpness of the thorns to create one of the repeating shape motifs that I want to try and use in her armor. I'm also taking notes like shapes blooming out of each other, the protective nature of the thorns surrounding the roses, and the general contrast between soft and sharp things existing in one character design. For Quintessa, it's pretty much all about triangles, focusing on all of the cool, intricate shapes that flames can make, a typical triangular shape that peaks of volcanoes will take, and even the sharp shapes in the petals of volcanic plants like birds of paradise. She's a very active character with a bit of a destructive, dangerous streak later in the story, so this kind of shape language makes a lot of sense for her. And while I was at it, I also jotted down a lot of notes about her and her connection to the earth, because some of her power is based on volcanic symbolism, so that power literally comes from deep within the earth, but that soil can also be beneficial for certain ecosystems and environments and the growth of flora and fauna. So not necessarily an original concept, but there's definitely a creation-destruction theme with Quintessa's fire abilities. And I even jot down a couple of notes here about the relationship between fire and fuel and oxygen and how those themes and symbolism might affect Quintessa's character design. The symbolism going on here with both of these characters is not groundbreaking in the least, but I really love this exercise and I highly recommend it for anyone who wants to try it out and kind of mess around with different shapes and symbolism and try to intertwine those with your character design. It just provides a nice little foundation for who your character is, and it can strengthen their visual design a little bit. Moving on to the next step of the process, starting with Rose, I wanted to play around a little bit with the build and proportions of my characters because both of these ladies are fighters and it's a pretty big part of their personality, so I wanted their build to reflect their fighting style and their level of strength. Admittedly, I was having a little bit of a difficult art day whenever I was working on this first one, but Rose's build is supposed to be very strong and powerful, but not necessarily bulky because she's also very tall. Rose is 6'3", so I also wanted her height to be reflected in her proportions because the head tends to be proportionally smaller with a taller figure. Quintessa, on the other hand, is quite short, definitely below average height for a woman, but she also has more of an athletic build, and particularly a build that is more focused on running, kicking, fast acrobatic movements. So I wanted to give her slightly proportionally longer arms and legs to complement that fighting style. While I was at it, I also took this as an opportunity to do a bit of a face breakdown exploration of both of my characters just right off the bat, see if I can nail down what I generally want them to look like. I did gather a lot of face inspiration on both of my boards, and I kind of had a prior clear idea of what I wanted them to look like, but I took this time to also try and differentiate my two characters because I admit I'm an artist with an art style and sometimes I run into same face syndrome with these two. So I really tried to make all of the shapes of the individual components of their faces different and also tried to vary the proportions between all of them. For example, giving Rose a smaller forehead, smaller eyes, a smaller nose, and bigger lips, while giving Quintessa a bigger forehead to emphasize that she's a little bit younger than Rose, bigger eyes and eyebrows, a wider nose, and smaller lips. I also wanted to play with the concept that some people use, the proportions of a cat's face for the faces of their anime girls and just to make them look cuter and more appealing, but with a little bit of my own twist, so I did use a cat's face proportions to inspire Quintessa's face a little bit. But then I used the face proportions of a doe to inspire some of Rose's face shape design. Next, it was time to get into thumbnails and start brainstorming what I want some of these designs to look like, especially across outfit variations and weapons. I've really warmed up to the thumbnailing process over the last couple of years. I used to hate doing this just because it felt like extra work and an extra step, and I used to just go straight into like the full detailed character design pose and try to design from there. But I also personally have a tendency to get super lost in details and not see the big picture and how everything's unified, so thumbnailing is really good for that. You can minimize details and maximize things like silhouette, color palette, value grouping, you know, all the things that actually matter during this stage of the character design. Here I knew the main essence of Rose's design was not going to change all that much. She was still going to be wearing a full suit of plate armor with a cape and have a gratuitous amount of long pink hair. So refining her design at this stage was mostly about just translating her existing armor into the shape language that I wanted it to be in. A lot of that was taking my little thorny petal shape and just experimenting with it, inserting it into certain existing armor pieces, and trying to make that all fit together in a fluid way, flow together nicely while not being too complicated, because complicated armor is also super annoying to draw over and over again. I also wanted to make her armor a little bit more practical and actually extend all the way across her abdomen, because it used to not do that, and that kind of defeats half the point of wearing a breastplate in the first place. Speaking of practical armor, I also wanted to finally design a helmet for her, and the only reason why I haven't done this before is that I'm just really bad at drawing / designing helmets, but I decided to get out of my comfort zone and finally design a helmet for her, and I did this by piecing together multiple different styles that I saw on Pinterest, some more historical and some more fantasy inspired, but regardless of which design I settled on, I knew that I wanted her hair to come out of the top of the helmet like a plume so that we didn't lose that element of her design whenever the helmet is on, even though, yes, I acknowledge that that is extremely impractical. Imagine someone pulling your hair in battle whenever you have a helmet on, and there's almost nothing you can do to stop it. Maybe it's just fake hair for the aesthetic. I also took this opportunity to iterate on a couple of alternate casual designs for her, because drawing your character in armor over and over again is boring. So I also came up with some thumbnails for some casual gambeson and just a shirt and pants and boots, but she's also someone who's present and visible at court, so I wanted to design some slightly fancier outfits to help her blend in. Some of these are based on previous doodles that I did in my sketchbook that I never fully turned into outfit concepts for her. The first is this long waistcoat with puff sleeves and a dramatic collar, tall boots. I'm really into it. Personally, I would wear this. And the other one I wanted to design for her is a party gown to help her blend in during like balls and fancier affairs and stuff like that. And I really struggled to come up with something I liked for this design that still felt like Rose, because she just feels like a pants girl. So I once again decided to adapt this design that I had in my sketchbook, and I still don't know exactly how I feel about it, but I think I'm generally getting closer to something I'm pleased with. While I was at it, I quickly roughed in a working color palette for Rose, and then I was on to some sword concepts. Now, Rose's sword is something else that I'm pretty solid on design-wise. I at least know what I want it to look like conceptually, but there are a couple of things that I want to nail down visually and iterate on a little bit, especially in regards to the hilt of the sword. I started out by doing a couple of different variations and concepts on the proportions of the sword, the size of the blade, the length of the handle, and the directionality of the vines on the hilt, because I really wanted them to have a particular shape. I wanted them to weave together in a way that made sense and I could kind of reliably redraw, but also in a way that was very fancy. I eventually came up with a hilt that I liked by weaving together a couple of different iterations, and while I was at it, I also came up with some concepts for the sheath and her shield. Moving on to some thumbnails for Quintessa, I had slightly fewer outfits that I wanted to iterate on for her. Since her main outfit is a traveling outfit, it's comprised of a couple of different layers that can be worn in different variations, and she doesn't really have outfit or design changes in this part of the story. This is just kind of a base outfit that she can add layers onto or take layers off of, and even mix and match with some other pieces of clothing. So that's all I really wanted to accomplish with this first part of the design. In this part of the story, she's also existing in a very subtropical, warm, but also rainy type of climate, which is one of the reasons why her hooded capelet has been such a mainstay of her design. In the story, she not only uses it for disguising herself sometimes, but also for whenever it rains and whenever it gets just a little bit chilly. This capelet has had a pretty consistent design throughout her history, but I did change it here to just have slightly sharper corners and edges and made it look a little bit more asymmetrical in the hem. And I also wanted the tips of the capelet to curl around Quintessa like flames. Underneath the capelet, Quintessa has traditionally worn kind of a sleeveless tunic type garment that also has shorts underneath it, and I mostly wanted to keep the spirit of that here, but also mix it up in layers so that she can take things on or off, mostly for the purposes of me wanting to draw her with a simplified design sometimes, because she's one of the characters I like to practice action poses with. I also wanted to add just a little bit more texture and embellishment to her main design because Quintessa is ex-nobility, so I also imagine that some of the items that she's wearing are things she used to have. So I experimented with the idea of adding a flame motif to her tunic and also to a poncho that you'll see in a second here. And speaking of flames, I also did some concepts for a huge axe that would fit her character design and shape language a lot more than the clunky square one that I had before. I used a lot of sharp curving flame shapes for these and kind of tried to blend together the concepts of an axe and a scythe in one, and brought similar sharp threatening energy into the last concept that I did for her here, which is her alternate villain design that she has at some point in the story. I don't want to go too much into this in case I actually ever make the story, but Quintessa has a bit of an emo phase, so I wanted to design a very sharp, villainous outfit for her based on obsidian and magma. You know, just a very stereotypical villain look. I even played around with the idea here of giving her a big old flame-looking faux hawk to make her even edgier, and I kind of like it. I might actually go with that idea. To wrap it up, I did some color work to finally try to decide on a color palette for Quintessa after all these years, and while I was at it, I also did some colored concepts for her obsidian design. So with some brainstorming done, it's finally time to move on to the actual reference sheets. I decided to start with Rose because Quintessa was giving me a couple of problems, but also Rose's design is a little bit less complicated and I have it a little bit more thought out at this point. Since my drawing skills were feeling a little hazy the day I was doing the proportion and body concepts, I decided to sketch a new concept for Rose's reference sheet here. This time I decided not to have any proportion guides up and do it a little bit more intuitively because those were messing with my eyes a little bit before, and I'm definitely a lot more pleased with the proportions of her body type this second time around. Of course, Rose's main design is her armor, so that's the main one I want to get figured out first here. In the sketch, I'm basically carrying over the same general shapes that I did in the thumbnail, but making them just a little bit more detailed, but I'm not gonna know quite how this is turning out until I actually clean it up and do real inks, so the inking phase is where I'm making a lot of design decisions. The goal with the armor was to make the different plates look like they're blooming out of each other like roses while still fitting together and functioning and articulating like armor. I also wanted to focus a lot of the visual noise around the upper body and on the breastplate to guide the viewer's eye towards Rose's face, and I also wanted to minimize and simplify the design of the greaves a little bit because in the past it's been one of my least favorite parts of Rose's armor. They've just been super annoying to draw. So a lot of this was just taking that same thorny petal shape and trying to translate that into armor. I also wanted to make Rose's hair even longer and even bigger in this design to make it more of a silhouette element, but also to make it look like a whole mess of brambles and thorns. In the past, a viewer pointed out to me that the way I draw her hair makes it look like little thorns are sticking out, so in this version of her design, I wanted to lean into that. For her coloration, I really like the palette I was able to come up with by tweaking that one color palette I got from Pinterest, so I pretty much carried that into the full color design, but I wanted to lean into some bluish coal tones for the armor just to provide the reds and pinks and peaches a little bit more contrast. I know the pinks and reds of this design can be a little bit overwhelming, so by making her armor mostly blue tones, I think that balances it out a good bit. I also made the red in the lining of her cloak more red than I ever have before to bring in a more prominent rose color and kind of make that theme a little bit more overt, and since I have ignored it so much in the past, in this main main design concept, I even decided to have her holding her helmet so that you know she's got one and her noggin will be protected in battle. So while I'm inking and coloring some weapons and messing around with a casual design for what's underneath her armor, let me provide you with a little bit of Rose character lore and backstory so that you know literally anything about the character I'm designing right now. So Rose and Quintessa are from the same shared universe / storyline, and the universe is basically like D&D fantasy roles. Basically anything that is cool in fantasy can exist in this world, but it's mostly based on like medieval fantasy type vibes, which is why of course Rose is a very cool tall lady knight. In this universe, she is what I call a floral elf, which is kind of a division of elves that get some of their powers from different flora and fauna. Her particular clan gets their powers and abilities from different flowers, and her immediate family gets their powers from roses. Hence her very silly on the nose surname, which is Thornblade, and there's an entire family of knights called Thornblade because I thought it would be funny if she is the one daughter and a family of pink-haired men who are beautiful and wield rose-themed swords and also have paralytic blood abilities. What's the link between roses and paralytic blood abilities, you might be wondering? I have absolutely no idea other than pricking your finger on a thorn and bleeding, and that's pretty much the extent of it. I just thought it would be cool if she wielded a sword that if it drinks your blood, it can paralyze you and then she can kill you a lot easier. I also thought it would be cool if her eyes turn red whenever the blood ability is activated. Sometimes the reason we do things on this channel is simply anime, but I am trying to dive a little bit deeper into the lore and the reasoning for this and figure it out, try to make it even cooler, and I think there might be some kind of ancient blood magic or flower worship going on here, I don't know. Again, still trying to figure out the kinks, but I think it would be cool if the explanation was kind of dark to kind of match the symbolism of like beauty and softness of roses and then the abrasive reality of thorns. Anyways, as a teen, Rose trains to be a squire with her brothers and is eventually knighted for a good deed that I don't remember off the top of my head right now. I think I had it figured out at one point. Anyways, eventually she goes to serve as the bodyguard of the Elven Crown Prince, which her father and brothers see as this high honor for her family, but she is kind of bummed out about it because she knows it's gonna be super boring, so she kind of doesn't want to go do it. Eventually she warms up to it because the prince is nice and they get along and there's not too many assassination attempts, but more importantly, being in the royal court and knowing the prince gives her access to knowledge and education that she didn't have access to before. So eventually she and the prince have a fun dynamic where she teaches him to fight because even though he's a prince, he kind of sucks at that, and he tutors her in all of the academic knowledge that she thirsts for. In terms of personality, Rose is pretty stoic most of the time, but she also has big herbo energy. She's a little jockey, and she can also be a little sardonic when she wants to, but she can also be a little silly because she's very self-serious and can also often lack self-awareness. She likes to mess with other people, but she does not know when other people are messing with her, which makes her a prime target. Honestly, her personality, lore, and backstory are all things that I'm still fleshing out, but getting back to the actual reference sheet, after finishing up her main armor design, I wanted to do a casual design of what is essentially underneath her armor. This is inspired by a couple of the concepts that I did earlier, but then kind of simplified and mixed up to make it a little bit easier for her to walk around in and fight in. The outfit's basically a doublet with leg of mutton sleeves, some lace-up pants, some bracers, and thigh-high boots. I wanted to design it in such a way that it had a similar silhouette to what she's wearing whenever she has her armor on, but also something she could conceivably wear underneath her armor as the underneath layer. So I imagined that when she puts her armor on over this, she does take off the leg of mutton sleeves, which I imagine can just lace off the same way medieval sleeves usually do. Once I finished up the casual design, I also inked and rendered the headshots that I drew earlier. With these, I was really trying to nail down Rose's likeness and beauty, and also give a couple of examples of what her hair looks like down and then up in her alternate bun hairstyle. And like every single artist I know right now, can you just see the arcane bug tightening its grip on me more and more? It's just, there's no way out at this point. While I was at it, I also made sure to do a close-up concept on the final helmet design, and I decided to do this from the side, that way you can kind of mirror it and figure out what it looks like from different angles. I did not feel like doing a turnaround of the helmet because I'm so bad at drawing them, and that might be the reason why I should have done a turnaround of the helmet, but we're not going to discuss that too much. But here I also wanted to give an example of what it looks like whenever the hair is coming out the top of the helmet, because I did not do a smaller pose of her with the helmet on with her armor. Finally, it was time to add a few alternate designs for her, and I decided to choose her gambeson, her castle waistcoat, and then finally the ball gown as her 3 alternate designs. And I kept these mostly the same from doing thumbnails on them, so a lot of the design decisions came down in terms of adding detail and color. The gambeson was actually the color palette that surprised me the most, because I expected to make this more of like that wine red color that she had going on, but I decided to try to make it more of a silvery color at first just to see what it looked like. Again, just to match the silver of her armor, since this is also technically armor, and I really liked how it looked, so I ended up going with that cooler color palette for the gambeson, and then sticking with more warm tones for the castle outfit and ball gown. One design motif that did come across more in the details was adding the lacing on the pants and also doing some like thorn inspired jewelry on the castle outfit and the ball gown. I really like both of these concepts because of how it hails back to thorns and vines and that sort of thing, and I'm also a really big fan of the poofy rose inspired sleeves that tend to be a theme on pretty much all of her outfits. I think that's a repeating shape that just makes a lot of sense. I think if I drew the castle or ball gown in a more illustrative style, I would make them look a little bit more like actual rendered roses and give them petals and give them a little bit more detail in general. But I still think this works well for not overcomplicating these like smaller concepts of the character design. Finally, I also did a concept for her eye whenever she activates her blood powers and it turns red in that very anime way that I haven't quite decided how it makes sense, but I like it, and sometimes the role of cool is the only explanation you need for a character design. And with that, I think that's Rose's character design finally complete, and just to make you cringe in pain a little bit, this reference sheet took me about 10 hours. Continuing on to Quintessa's reference sheet, I actually began this first like pose overview of her character design before I even started working on Rose's reference sheet, and this was the part that I said was bothering me, so I decided to take a break from it and go work on Rose's for a little bit. So for Quintessa, I decided to start on her character design from that first build sketch we did because I was happy enough with it, but I was pretty dang happy with the main outfit design that I came up with during my thumbnail session, so I decided to take that and begin cleaning it up as the main outfit on our ref sheet. So immediately here, forgive the anatomy and proportions because my eyes were kind of broken from doing a lot of studies on this day, and I know it doesn't look great. I'm gonna fix it later. Don't even worry about it. I started by sketching that main outfit design on our figure here, but adding a lot more detail like the little buckles and belts and lacing and things like that. I also duplicated the pose and did a version of that without the capelet and also without the leg armor so that you can see the more casual version of her design. And from there, I basically jumped right into inking. While I'm doing that real quick, let me give you a little bit of detail and lore on Quintessa's backstory. So again, this is working lore. It's still incomplete and it's not fleshed out all of the way, but in the current working version of the story, that does not exist. Quintessa is former nobility. She's a princess, but she is the daughter of royals that are not very nice, good people. So they basically get revolutioned on by their kingdom, constituents, what have you. And since the crown family is being hunted down and Marie Antoinetted by the people, she and her brother and uncle go into hiding. They're pretty young at this point, so they don't know what the heck is going on, but her brother was partially involved in the whole political landscape of her kingdom, so he does feel guilt and partial responsibility for what has gone on. So they spend a lot of the time during this portion of the story with her main outfit in hiding and kind of living on the run, a nomadic life, while both people from their old kingdom are after them, trying to assassinate them, and other political factions in the area are also after them, trying to use them as pawns in the whole power vacuum and political situation going on. One of these factions does end up capturing them and they work together for a little bit, but later in the story, Quintessa does end up doing a bit of a betrayal and going down a dark path for a little bit, hence her emo design. Anyways, in Quintessa's younger years, her personality is very outgoing, upbeat, curious. She's really inquisitive and excited about learning new things and skills, especially in relation to fighting and mastering her own abilities. And due to her fire powers and red hair, she's unsurprisingly also a passionate hothead. Those are just the roles. If you have a fire character, you have to make them that way. I'm sorry, this was not a choice. But much like her flame ability, she can also be warm and expressive and free-spirited. Originally, whenever I made this character, there was a bit of a different setting for this whole story, and she had a bit of an interest in aviation and mechanics and that sort of thing. So I think it would be cool to blend some of that back into this version of the character and maybe give her some kind of an interest in inventing and engineering and maybe even blacksmithing and welding given her fire abilities. Anyways, once again, the lore, the personality, all of the things are still very much a work in progress, but getting back to the ref sheet, after I finished coloring the first two designs, the main outfit and the casual one, I realized just how much I hated some of the proportions and anatomy choices going on, so I went in and fixed those. I made her head smaller, I made her legs proportionally longer like I had originally planned to, I made her waist a little bit more proportional because it was very, very small at first. I also tweaked the faces a little bit because they were looking a little scary baby doll head at first. I don't know what was going on, I'll be honest. I was considering scrapping these and starting the whole thing over again for a little bit, but I decided to be reasonable and just try to tweak them and fix them to the point where I was happy enough, and I think I was decently successful there. Moving on from that, I blocked in the rest of the reference sheet and generally tried to lay everything else out, and then I started in on the pose of her obsidian villain design, which once again in the thumbnail phase, I was pretty happy with what I came up with there. I didn't really feel the need to change anything about it, but I did end up using the faux hawk idea for the updated design in this one. I just decided it was too edgy and too good to pass up, and I think it really fits with the more flamboyant, over-the-top nature of her obsidian design. I also like the touch of storytelling involved here, that her hair is significantly longer now that she has the faux hawk, which means that a good bit of time has passed since her previous design. I kept the coloring on this design very close to what I did in the thumbnail phase, but I was able to detail the magma design on the capelet a little bit more and give it more detail and a little bit more grit. I imagine this is maybe something she embroidered on and personalized herself. As someone who's former nobility and like a woman in a medieval noble setting, she probably has that skill. So I think it would be cool to have that personal touch even coming through during her villain era. Once I was finished with that design, I moved on to rendering out her axe, which I was pretty happy with, again, the thumbnail version of that design that I did, but I did make a couple of tweaks to it just to make it make a little bit more sense. I have to say it's also nice to see the axe next to both versions of the character because it doesn't look out of place with her old design or her new villainous redesign. I think the shape language stays consistent and the axe just works for her character. Like I did with Rose on this ref sheet, I also rendered the headshots that I did previously and gave them colors and a little bit more definition. I once again decided to do one with her hair down and one with her hair up to give myself a little bit more hairstyle variation. And I also did a close-up shot of her eye, this time in her post-time skip villain era where she's got an edgy scar because of course she does. And there is a story behind this scar, as there is with any important scar, which I'm not going to get into today because spoilers for the story that doesn't exist. Since I had some spare space on this ref sheet, I also decided to do a little accessories slash what's in my bag for Quintessa. I gave her a pretty gnarly looking dagger and also a journal, some pens and some quills, and a water skin. I also gave her a torch and some flint and steel because just fire girl things. Finally, I wanted to give her two more alternate outfits, just things to kind of add on to the outfit she has on now and mix things up and layer if it gets cold out and just generally give her some variety. So for the first design on the left, I wanted to give her a cute little nighttime sitting around the campfire type outfit, just something cozy for hanging out around camp. And I also wanted to design a cute little woven tapestry poncho for her that has a little flame design on it. There's something very Breath of the Wild about some of my design sensibilities for Quintessa, and I feel like you can really see that in these two alternate outfits because the other one is kind of similar to her other casual outfit, but this time she's got big old poofy green pants on and then a flame themed halter top underneath a flame themed vest. It's like Hyrule meets the Fire Nation or something like that. Again, with these I just wanted to give her some variation and alternate alternate clothing outfits that she could have in her backpack just carrying around with her, and I also wanted to give her some outfits and articles of clothing that she would have from her own kingdom, because this phase of Quintessa still very much has not given up her home and her whole family culture, and maybe she still hung on to a couple of the clothing items or heirlooms that she still had from back then, and sometimes she'll mix and match them with other clothing to blend them in so that it's not too obvious. Anyways, from there I finished up the ref sheet with just a couple little details and finishing touches, and as your second cringy fun fact of the video, I thought that I was faster on this reference sheet, but it also took me just about 9 hours. Hello, and welcome to the end of the video. I hope that you enjoy these finished designs. It feels like such a relief to actually have my characters that have been in my head for all of this time actually looking back at me and looking like themselves and having full color. It's a good feeling. I'm also starting to realize now the reason I don't do full detailed reference sheets anymore is because they take like 10 hours, and for some reason I forgot about that. Comment below, does it take you 10 hours to do a reference sheet like this? Am I just incredibly slow? Is my slowness validating for you in your speed? Honestly, maybe don't tell me that last part. As with anything I make, there's already changes and flaws in the reference sheets that I'll probably go back and tackle at some point and continue to update, but I'm at least glad that right now my characters are documented in a certain amount of detail that I can be proud of. I no longer feel the amount of shame that I was feeling at the beginning of the video, and I would also like to do this again with some of my other characters, so if you enjoyed this in this format and you would like me to do it again, let me know. I definitely enjoyed working on these. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, especially for watching till the end. Also, thank you to anyone who checks out my Skillshare class. I really hope you like it. I worked hard on it. Some of it did kind of overlap with me taking care of my sick cat, so I was a little frazzled trying to get everything done, but I really hope that it's helpful to someone. But as always, the biggest thank you for this video and every single one of my videos goes to my patrons, and especially my executive producers. A huge thank you goes to my executive producers, including Becca, Mandolin, Cyrus Orion, Ghost Got Ghosted, Jenny Craftsma, Optimus Prime, I Do TKD, Ren, Band Off the Yellow, Cloud Max, Marita Wasner, Velly Smelly, Stabby Horse, Holding Space for Me That Espresso, Ember Creeps, Cardia X, Christina Kimtia Art, Call Me Ash, Blaze Ravenscar, Lunira, Fiasco, Mossy Raven, Aries or Aries, I'm not saying that name on the internet, ABW Makes, Icecavan, Awendu, Liana, Ermler Jean, Breeza, Brian, Phoenix, PNG Not Found, Freedom and Gus Gus, Cat, Dodo, Zyle S, Agent Sketchy, Thea Maia, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, Hypnos, Katie, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, and Bean the Bread.